Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Sara MacIntyre, who is government relations, public affairs, government political expert, politically knowledgeable person who is now working with the Convenience Association of Canada. She's the head of government relations for the Convenience Industry Council of Canada. And she wants to raise an issue that I wasn't aware of. She's saying that contraband tobacco is a huge issue. It's an issue because it's put forward by organized crime, and that it's a bigger issue than cocaine from a monetary standpoint with organized crime, guns, etc. Sara, welcome to the show, and tell us what's this issue.
Yeah, hi, Brian. Thanks for having me on. So I'm VP Western Canada for the Convenience Industry Council of Canada. We just released a report that we commissioned with Ernst & Young. So they actually did the methodology and the findings for the report, focusing on 3 provinces, BC, Ontario, and Newfoundland. And what they basically looked at was the rate of the decline of legal sales, and then attributing that to the growth in contraband tobacco. So we're seeing it from coast to coast in the country. So the numbers in BC are just as staggering as the numbers in Ontario and Newfoundland. And the reason that we did this report is obviously our members are retailers. They sell legal tobacco. And they've obviously seen a massive drop in legal tobacco sales, foot traffic, and that's putting a lot of their business viability at risk because there's been nothing done on contraband tobacco.
Where are people buying this contraband tobacco?
You can buy it online, actually. And with no age checks. There's a number of different sites that are popping up all over the place online. Native Smokes for Less. And you can also buy them. They are in a lot of smoke shacks on different reserves across the country. So here in the Okanagan, I live in Kelowna. There's a smoke shack just up the road where you can get a carton of cigarettes for $60. That's contraband. Whereas if you walk into a retailer, you're spending about $175. So the price and taxes have increased on tobacco, smokers are obviously looking for more alternatives. And what's different than in the past is that there are more alternatives everywhere, and they're across the country. So the supply has massively increased in the past few years. That's what we're seeing that's different.
And is the contraband, good quality? Is it healthy? Is it the same product like generic pharmaceuticals are of branded pharmaceuticals?
It's smoking, it's tobacco, it's not good for you, right? But there is, contraband tobacco isn't subject to health inspections, health regulations. There's been tests that have found a whole bunch of different types of byproducts in the actual cigarettes. I don't think I need to go through those, but one of the big differences that I think a lot of fire departments are seeing is that contraband tobacco doesn't use self-extinguishing filters, which is required for legal manufacturers here in Canada. So oftentimes you'll hear of these random house fires where someone's fallen asleep with a cigarette. It's generally a contraband tobacco cigarette that's not using self-extinguishing filters. In fact, even in my building here in Kelowna, when I first moved in, the entire building was evacuated because a gentleman on the 15th floor fell asleep with a cigarette and started his mattress on fire. And it was contraband tobacco. And as a result of that, 91 units were damaged, and I think we're pushing about $5 million in water damage just in my building. So there's lots of different ripple effects as to the impacts of non-legal tobacco, illicit tobacco, illegal tobacco that's manufactured not according to health regulations as set out in Health Canada.
And you're saying that this is more profitable for organized crime than cocaine? Seriously?
Yeah, it's 8 times more profitable. Well, when you look at, the source of it, it's domestically produced. It's once you have the investment in the actual cigarette making machines, the product is pretty easy to ship. It's nice and it's light. So you can pack a lot into a cargo van and move it across the country. So yeah, it's very profitable. And that's why you always see contraband tobacco busts always are accompanied with more severe narcotics and often guns and cash. It's one network that moves a whole bunch of different commodities. But because contraband tobacco really isn't on the priority list for public safety and police officers, it's moved around pretty freely and flagrantly across the country. I mean, to get from Ontario to BC, it's basically one road. We know where it is, and the supply chain is not interrupted. It's growing in BC. In fact, the numbers that come out of the EY report in British Columbia estimates the contraband market to make up between 32 and 44% of the market.
Really?
So that's a lot of money. Yeah, that's a
huge amount of money. And so it's obviously a loss to your industry, but it's a loss to legal manufacturers, and it's a huge loss of government revenue.
That's right. Massive loss in tax revenue. So, you know, just looking at conservative estimates from the EY report, just in BC, he estimates that it's about $727 million over 4 years that's gone to organized crime. In terms of tax revenues in BC, it's between 215 and 591 million. In Ontario, it's between 990 million and 1.8 billion dollars in 4 years.
And lost tax revenue.
And lost tax revenue. And that's on the conservative side of things. So, you know, that's not police officers, that's not schools, that's not ambulances, that's, you know, not firefighters. Those are going right into the pockets of organized crime.
So what's the solution?
Well, the solution, it's difficult, and that's why probably there has been a bit of reluctancy from governments in because it's moved across provinces, and because it is tobacco and there's federal taxes and provincial taxes. We really need to see some coordination between the federal and provincial governments to tackle contraband tobacco as a priority from a public safety perspective, but also in terms of lost revenue. And also, you know, it's our retailers are having to compete basically against organized crime. So there's, you know, two markets that exist, and obviously it's our members that are getting hit the hardest. But we'd also like to see increased resources. So right now, the RCMP has roughly a $5 billion budget annually. $3 million goes to contraband tobacco. So it's literally a drop in the bucket. There's very few provinces that have targeted task force looking at contraband tobacco. Quebec actually did bring in a model, and it's called Access Tobacco. It's pretty innovative. And it allows local agencies, policing agencies, to retain the proceeds of crime from contraband tobacco busts. So it almost becomes a bit of a self-financing police force. Instead of taking from existing resources, they're bringing in new resources, and that's helping fund those officers that are dedicated to fighting contraband tobacco. And I think what we really want to see too is penalties change. Very rarely in any of these busts that you see headlines, and we just had one here in West Kelowna a couple of months ago. Pretty big contraband bust that found also guns and cash, and it was in a residential area down the street from an elementary school. And you know, the charges are basically the amount of tax that would have been calculated, that would have been lost in the bust. So it's really a slap on the wrist. And because our court systems are so backed up, the chances of them actually getting a conviction and serving jail time is negligible. And organized crime knows that. So they factor in the costs of busts and arrests into their, you know, it's just the cost of doing business for them, and it's still profitable. So we want to see increased penalties, and we want to see increased enforcement. We want to see increased resources. And I think the other piece that's missing is public awareness. We just did a public opinion survey in Canada, our association, and more than half of Canadians don't know that it's illegal to purchase tobacco online or on reserve if you're not First Nations. And so there's a huge knowledge gap in terms of people not knowing the difference and not knowing what is legal. So I think a public awareness campaign would go a long way to kind of.
I didn't know it was illegal to purchase cigarettes on reserve.
Yeah, if you're not First Nations and you're not a reserve resident, yeah, it's illegal. So you fall into that camp, Brian.
Is it illegal to sell? Because, you know, the ads that are put up are trying to recruit us to stop and buy.
Yeah. No, it's illegal to sell to non-First Nations. Yeah, that's what makes the contraband market so unique in Canada, is there is the exception for First Nations to produce and manufacture tobacco for First Nations reserve residents and those with status cards. But if you're not First Nations, it's not legal for you to go and buy that same tobacco. That is not taxed, it's not regulated, and it's not health inspected. So oftentimes what's happening is that First Nations tobacco that's being produced is actually being shipped across the country by organized crime organizations. I mean, there's been a number of different RCMP operations. There was one a couple of years ago, and it's detailed in the Ernst & Young report, Operation Karen's, which shows, you know, the Hells Angels and other kind of real well-known organizations that have been caught engaged in very sophisticated contraband distribution networks.
It's a fascinating issue that I wasn't aware of. Sara MacIntyre, thank you very much for sharing it with us. We're going to take a break and come back in just 2 minutes with Sara MacIntyre talking about contraband tobacco, how big of an issue it is, organized crime providing it and capturing a huge amount of profit, money, and lost tax revenue to provincial governments. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Sara MacIntyre. She is the Vice President of Western Canada. Is that what you said your title is? Vice President of Western Canada for the Convenience Industry Council of Canada. And let me tell you a little bit about Sara, if I could. She spent quite a bit of time with the Stephen Harper government in Ottawa in communications, also with Christy Clark in British Columbia. She knows a lot about politics and a lot about government relations. And so I can imagine the Convenience Industry Association Council of Canada really is benefiting from your knowledge and expertise in that area. We've been chatting about the problem of contraband tobacco. And Sara, you know, I'm shocked at the kind of numbers that you're describing. And it's lost tax revenue, and it's lost profit for your industry, and it's an issue in regards to, health and safety, as you identified. We talked about potential solutions, and you're saying that part of it is just that there's not enough policing dollars that are dedicated to the issue. What's your council doing to try to solve this, to try to raise awareness?
Well, I think the report, the Ernst & Young report, was really the first step. We did do a report in 2020 that looked at contraband tobacco as well. It noted that during the lockdowns, there was a resurgence in illegal tobacco sales. And as soon as those transportation networks opened up again, they plummeted once again. So this report is building on those findings and seeing, what is the general trend outside of extraordinary pandemic circumstances, and putting the numbers out there so that people can see, okay, this isn't just, somebody on a corner shop that's offering up contraband tobacco. It's in every community across the country. And with that comes organized crime, and with that comes community safety issues and the whole basket of problems that come with a contraband commodity. So we're meeting with officials trying to bring the awareness. Most are pretty, they're aware that there is a problem. I don't think that they're aware of the extent of the problem and the prevalence of the problem. So, generally speaking, we've seen in provincial governments, the forecasting of revenue from tobacco sales declining over years and years, and they're not getting those numbers right. And in the past, they've been able to get those numbers right because, smoking rates have pretty much stabilized outside of, the regular 3 to 4% in attrition annually. And so getting the tobacco tax revenue forecast was pretty simple arithmetic for most finance officials. And if you look at all the provinces across the country, they're off by hundreds of millions of dollars each year and having to adjust their forecast. So that in and of itself kind of explains that there's something going on in the black market, that we're seeing where are these smokers going, and they're going to cheaper alternatives, of course. And so we're kind of pressing the case of, here's the extent of the problem, here's where we see the actual solutions in terms of increased resources, increased enforcement, increased penalties, and increased awareness with the public of what's legal and what isn't legal. And, this is, criminals don't check for identification. I mean, I think one of the big health objectives for any public policy with respect to smoking cessation is to ensure there's no new generations of smokers. And clearly, if you're ordering online or if you're going into a smoke shop, there's not really an ID enforcement. No one's coming through doing spot checks to make sure that they're selling to only 18 or above. So there's that problem, but it also leads to, we're not really seeing what the true prevalence of smoking rates are in Canada. The numbers that Statistic Canada puts out in their surveys each and every year is flawed. So in terms of public policy and health objectives, the growth of contraband tobacco is running headwind right into those objectives. And so go ahead.
Just go on.
No, I was just saying, if government was really serious about really making sure we're getting tobacco off the marketplace for youth, the first place to focus is on contraband tobacco.
But is this the rationale for actually decreasing the taxes on tobacco? Because if 30 to 40%, as you say, of tobacco usage is contraband, what it says is that there's, a third to 40% of the people that are choosing to go to an alternative, we're losing that tax revenue. And because of that, we're losing the disincentive that government's put in place to try to discourage tobacco use for, almost half, at least a third of the people. And we've created this huge profit opportunity for organized crime. And I think what we found is that whenever you create too much of a profit opportunity for organized crime, they're going to move into it in whatever sector it's in. And so the high taxation rates are no longer achieving their objective for a third of the population, if not more.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a tipping point, right, where there's just, sorry, my dog's chewing a squeaky toy right now, my apologies. But yeah, there's a tipping point where, the disincentive, the financial disincentive actually stops having an impact on that market, and they just find an alternative. And that's exactly what's happened here. So it's a really big problem in Newfoundland. Why? Because they just brought in increased tobacco taxes. It's the most expensive province in the country to buy tobacco. Second most expensive province, British Columbia. Second largest size of contraband market, British Columbia. So yeah, I think you're right that there is a bit of disingenuous kind of applause that some in the health sector would say, look at we're decreasing smokers because we see decrease in legal sales. Well, that's not the full picture. We're just seeing them go to different markets. So
well, it's worse than that. What we're seeing is that as we increase the taxes, more and more are going to satisfy their addiction with unhealthy alternatives, illegal alternatives that are fueling organized crime. So we're making this problem far worse by we may feel good that we're increasing the taxes, but because of that, the tax increases have gone so far that people are going to unhealthy alternatives that are not regular convenience stores, that are online, that are profiting organized crime. It sounds like the solution is actually worse than the problem.
Yeah, and I think government inaction for a number of years has contributed to the absolute explosive growth. And in the 90s, they did look at reducing tobacco taxes precisely because contraband tobacco in the 90s was prevalent, never to the degree that it is now. But yeah, you have to look at, the short-term kind of patting on the back, increasing sin taxes because those are bad behaviors and we want to discourage them, to the actual reality. Are we having an impact on the smoking population, or are we just applauding ourselves for being the most expensive place to buy cigarettes? So the difficulty is that nobody wants to talk about smoking. I don't want to talk about smoking. Government doesn't want to talk about smoking. The health lobbies have done such a good job for a number of years to kind of demonize smokers. If you know anyone that smokes, they hate themselves. They hate being outside smoking, and it's definitely less okay to be a smoker than it is to light a joint in British Columbia outside. And so because of that, negative connotation associated with smokers and the fact that they're of bad character because they have an addiction, we have no compassion for smokers, unlike we for other addictions, that nobody really wants to talk about it. And nobody wants to get serious about solutions.
But like almost any other kind of tax, you reach a point where the tax is so high that people go to extraordinary measures to avoid paying that tax or get around that tax. It's the same in income tax, where often we have found that you put in an income tax that people feel is fair and reasonable, that pays for our services. People pay for that tax, but when taxation gets too high, people start thinking about changing their residency or doing inappropriate things or moving all their intellectual property to Ireland or whatever all that kind of stuff is. So that you've got to have taxation that is reasonable. And I think your E&Y report probably suggests that the taxation has reached a point where it actually isn't helping. It might be hurting.
Oh, it definitely is. It's hurting because it's pushing, smokers to a market where they're consuming an unregulated, untested, uninspected product that is going into the pockets of organized crime. So, it's got a two-point punch really in terms of behavior, is that it's going to contraband tobacco, but it's also funding organized crime. So and also lost tax revenues for government. So there's
and it also impacts your industry. How does it impact your industry?
Oh, it's impacted our industry massively. We've really struggled. We were the frontline heroes during the pandemic, opened our doors, employees and owners were there for communities. And since then, we haven't seen the return of foot traffic that we had pre-pandemic. So, people are driving less because they're not going to the office or because gas is too expensive. And now we're seeing a massive reduction of foot traffic because people aren't buying their cigarettes from retailers. They're actually buying them online or from Contraband Tabacco, but or at different smoke shacks across the country. But the other issue is that it impacts the whole kind of supply chain. We have a member, and this is public knowledge, it's a distributor here in Canada that has had to file for bankruptcy for a number of different reasons. But this distributor was the only distributor that provided goods and services or goods to remote and rural communities in Northern Ontario. And so because it's no longer economically viable for them to be moving their products without having tobacco in that shipping. Tobacco, as I mentioned, is kind of an ideal part of a load because it doesn't take up a lot of room and it's very light, but then it's profitable for the retailer. So that impacts the distributor as well. So as contraband tobacco, or as tobacco is moving off that truck and it's moving into contraband tobacco territory, distributors are having to find different products. Well, nothing's is as efficient as tobacco. And so it's changed those razor thin margins that distributors have in Canada. It's basically erased them. So and then that impacts, goods being delivered to rural and remote communities. So it's impacting the entire retail chain, entire supply chain for our industry. And it's something, you don't want to see a large national Canadian company facing economic challenges.
Particularly one reason, because government taxation is too high.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Sara MacIntyre, thank you so much for raising this issue. It's something I wasn't aware of, and I bet most people aren't. And I think that I didn't realize it was illegal to buy contraband tobacco at a native shop. I didn't realize it was illegal to sell. I see those big ads, and the big ads and the big signs as I drive through native reserves suggest that the vast majority of people don't know that that is illegal. And I didn't realize that there was this health risk that you've identified, as well as public safety risk in regards to the self-extinguishing filters. And I didn't realize that this tax loss was nearly as big. And so I do think that extra policing makes a lot of sense. And I think that governments need to look at where their taxation levels are, and have they gone up so high that they're actually losing tax revenue in total? Because, as I said, I think when tax rates get too high, people look for alternatives, and if the tax rate was reasonable, people aren't going to drive or contact a contraband place to purchase. And so, Sarah, thank you so much for raising this. I think there's some other issues that are affecting your industry as well. So I'd like to take a break for some messages and come back in 2 minutes with Sara MacIntyre and talk about violence and shoplifting and credit card fees and some other things that are impacting the convenience store industry. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Sara MacIntyre. She is a political government relations, public affairs expert, and she's got an unbelievable experience in this area. Let me just tell you a little bit about some of the jobs that she's had. She was the Director of Communications and Government Relations for Naikun Wind Development. She was the press secretary in the Prime Minister's office when Stephen Harper was Prime Minister of Canada. She was a contributor for the Sun News Network. She was the principal consultant, I love this company name, for Elbows Up Communications. I think that's got to be an interesting communications company. Probably Gordie Howe would have loved that. She was a national columnist for Sun Media. She was an advisor for a communications company called BAI Communications. She was an advisor in the communications industry. She called herself, I love this, her own boss at Virkasira Consulting. She's a certified Bikram yoga instructor, a policy advisor at the Haltane Research Institute in Calgary, a communications advisor for the Allura Mill Hotel and Spa. And now she is the Vice President, Western Canada, for the Convenience Industry Council of Canada. And Sarah, in your resume is missing, and I'm missing, the time you spent with Christy Clark. When was that?
Oh, that was right when I left Harper's office. So that was 2012 to I think 2013.
You're going to have to add that to your LinkedIn resume.
Oh gosh, I don't have everything in there. It's too much. I mean, I was also the BC director for the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. So that was a number of years ago as well. So it's funny for me just coming back to British Columbia and talking to a lot of my stakeholder friends and media, because the last time they really talked to me was when I was in Christie's office, and then before that was when I was with the Taxpayers Federation. So for a lot of these people, it's come around full circle. I just seem to keep coming back to the West Coast.
And I got to ask you, you said that you live in Kelowna. Did the fires impact you?
Well, I watched the fires. I was on the other side of the lake, so I watched the fires come down, and I wasn't evacuated, no. But it impacted everybody in Kelowna. The smoke was absolutely oppressive for days upon days. You couldn't go outside. Your eyes were burning. Your nose would be filled with soot, and just trying to take the dog out for a quick walk and come back, and you'd be hacking, but you just get absolutely exhausted because you're not getting the oxygen levels when you're breathing outside. So I was okay. I was fortunate. The firefighters here are incredible. We had a lot of support come in from across the country and around the world, and they've just yesterday put the McDougall fire, which was the fire that everybody saw in the news media and coverage. They just said that as of yesterday, it's controlled. So it took a long time to get that fire under control.
There must be many people in your community that are homeless or have had, losses to all or part of their properties. How's the community doing that?
It's resilient. I mean, it seems every few years the fires have a massive impact on one area residentially here in Kelowna. And so there's a pretty good infrastructure of supports, and people are aware what the protocols are when alerts happen and evacuation orders happen. Lots of support, lots of community organizations, and food and clothing and accommodations. But it is going to be, it's had you talk about the housing crisis, and now we've got a lot of this big kind of pressure on the construction industry now for rebuilding homes, or individuals and families that are needing to buy homes to replace the ones that they've lost. But, one story that just kind of breaks my heart is there's a Wilson's Landing, which is on the west side. It's just not far from the Lake Okanagan Resort, which burnt all the way to the ground. But the fire department there, 13 of the guys that were out there had their houses burned down as they were fighting the fires to protect other people's homes. And that's just one story, but you think like that's half of the fire department lost their homes while they were out saving other people's homes. And there's everyday heroism in this area, like that don't get the headlines, but it is a very giving community, and everyone knows to step up when forest fires hit. And yeah, I mean, it's devastating for people to lose it, but lose everything that they own. Some people, have had their family home for generations, and losing everything inside of that. And so, but we didn't have a fatality. So to consider the ferocity of those fires, the speed at which they moved, the winds that were involved, to not have that is absolutely incredible. So resiliency is part of Kelowna's DNA.
Well, and we're glad that you're safe. So thank you for that description of what's happening in your community. And resilience is one of the things that I think a lot of communities find in disasters. And we need to make sure that we have those senses of communities and those community togetherness in the good times, because we do need them in the bad times. There's no question. Let me turn to some other issues. And I got to ask you, in regards to the convenience store industry, I haven't seen in British Columbia, and maybe I've just missed this, but there's been a lot of publicization lately of shoplifting and reasonably violent shoplifting in San Francisco, and it's been described as because of the homelessness crisis, the housing crisis, recession, inflation, job losses, etc., and also just sort of a general lack of respect for private property and retail stores, that people are constantly breaking into stores and grabbing goods and money and leaving. Do we have a far higher increase in that kind of shoplifting or violence or break and entry into convenience stores right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's across the country as well. It's coast to coast. People are feeling the impacts of social disease, which is, every retailer is seeing it, and our members are as well. And it makes for a challenging environment. It makes for a challenging environment for employee safety. And, you can imagine the type of anxiety an employee would feel if they have somebody coming in with erratic, unpredictable behavior, and they're in the store, and what to do. So, our members, all of the policies are observe and report, in order, people will come in and yes, they may grab a whole thing of beef jerky and throw it into their knapsack with drinks and whatever else. You do not intervene for risk of escalating. So, and that's frustrating for employees, but there's also an anxiety there of the unpredictability of individuals that come into stores, and just, flagrantly just take things. And there is a bit of this lawlessness kind of mentality where it feels like no one's being protected. When we call police services, they're not going to be coming to the retail location for a box of stolen chocolate bars. But it wasn't just the stolen chocolate bars. It's what it does to the actual store, what it does to the impression of the customer. And there's been a lot of discussion about how to solve these issues, and they're complex and they're everywhere. And I purport not to have any solutions in that regard, because I think the reasons for this are complicated. But at the end of the day, it challenges store owners and their viability. If you've got a loss of product, like tobacco, and then you've got theft loss, and then you've got vandalism, and then you've got employee turnover, you've got reduced foot traffic. These are all real big challenges for the everyday store operator. There is a recent operation that the Vancouver Police Department did here we're in Vancouver, called Operation Barcode, where they were trying to get, at least track some of these serial offenders that are shoplifters, because it's not always just an isolated person. Like, generally store owners know who's coming into their store, and it's on a regular basis. So you're not just hit once by one offender. They usually come back to you time and time again, which is another kind of affront to an employee or a store owner is watching the same person who just stole from you yesterday come in the door the next day and steal again from you. Not everybody's saying, let's throw these people all in jail. It's like, let's figure out why they're coming in there and having the need to steal in order to meet basic needs. And that's really beyond our association's ability to provide solutions. But at the end of the day, I think we need to see more police on the streets. Like, we need, just like, in the TTC, when there was the rise in random attacks on transit systems, the presence of police, or the presence of mental health officers, or presence of any kind of individual that has appropriate training, tends to de-escalate things and also serve as a disincentive to violate or perpetrate retailers at random.
I was in Florida and New York State recently, and in both places, some of the convenience stores or pharmacies that are like big convenience stores have under lock whole shelves of product, of higher value product, such that you got to actually go and find someone to unlock the shelf before you can grab some deodorant. Is that something that we're going to have to start instituting?
Well, there's a lot of cost for that. And then, it has an impact on consumer purchasing as well. If, it almost acts as a deterrent for someone to buy something, because they've got to go and find an individual, and they've got to wait there, and maybe they're in a rush. So maybe they don't buy it from your store that day. Maybe they go out to, some big box store areas where theft isn't as big of a problem, where those aren't those problems. So it ends up changing consumer behavior as well. And plus the costs of doing that. But there's a lot of different types of solutions that retailers are trying to test out to see if they're working, or some of them are just closing their doors. I always say the convenience store is really the canary in the coal mine. If you have a convenience store in a community area where there's some safety issues and they close their doors, that's generally going to be a neighborhood you're not going to go back into. And so if we can't keep the convenience store alive, it's going to lead to a whole host of other problems that we're going to be forced to deal with.
You mentioned earlier that credit cards and credit card fees are also an issue. What's that issue?
Well, credit cards take a percentage of at the point of sale from the merchant for the privilege of using the credit card. And because it's a percentage, as fuel prices have increased and the actual sale per customer has increased, it's becoming a bigger and bigger problem for our retailers. The federal government had promised that they were going to crack down on that and institute a 1% maximum threshold. And they did some negotiation, but they did it for businesses that have very small retail sales, so doesn't really capture or help anyone in the convenience sector or the hospitality sector by any means. And on that, retailers are also charged GST on the credit card merchant fee, so it's like getting hit twice. And for a lot of these individuals, we're basically becoming tax collectors for the government between lottery, tobacco, fuel, credit card fees. And honestly, at the end of the day, it's how credit card companies provide their loyalty programs. So it's on the backs of retailers that they're able to provide these loyalty programs by charging these credit card interchange fees, which really is a tax for our retailers, because there's no alternative for us. And as people have become more and more reliant on electronic payment as opposed in digital payments, it's become a bigger share of our point of sale, and so it's become a bigger cost on the bottom line for retailers.
Are retailers trying to encourage cash?
I mean, that's cash is king, but then, there's also handling issues with that as well. But yeah, I mean, there's no interchange fee for cash. But as you know, many of our retailers also offer fuel options, and it's, people are paying for their gas before they pump. So they're doing that via debit card or credit card. And so, we're moving towards a cashless society, but that means that the increase of credit card fees is really hitting retailers. I mean, it's hitting not just our retailers. I mean, it's you're hear it across the retail sector. I mean, I was at my veterinary the vet the other day, and they're like, please don't use your credit card when you're paying for services, because it costs us too much money. We prefer if you use debit or cash. So these are sound like they're small little irritants, but taken together, these are pretty strong headwinds for our sector. And a lot of our members are being pretty innovative. You see 7-Eleven offering a lot more hot food service options and sit down service options, while the electric vehicle owner is having your vehicle charged. They can come in and have a meal. You see different innovations that are being offered by some of our members across the country. But we are in a period of change for our sector, for sure, because there's a lot of different headwinds that have hit our traditional model. And so there's a need for innovation, and we're trying.
Well, I'm sure with your assistance, they'll do far better, because you've got that government relations, public affairs experience, and a lot of knowledge about what's going on in this country today. So thank you for the role that you play. We're going to take a break and come back with some concluding comments with Sara MacIntyre of the Convenience Industry Association in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. Our guest tonight is Sara MacIntyre. We've been talking about the convenience store industry, about contraband tobacco, about the impact of the huge amount of contraband tobacco on lower tax revenue, on public health issues, on safety issues, on convenience store profitability, and also some other issues about the convenience store industry. And I thank you for sharing some of those insights, because I wasn't aware of a lot of that. But Sara, I can't let you go without asking you a little bit about what's going on politically. Tell me, Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the Conservative Party, had an incredible convention just a couple of weeks ago. I know you follow national politics and provincial politics very closely. What do you think? Is he going to become the next prime minister, or is he peaking too early, or what's going on?
Yeah, I think Pierre is going to be the next prime minister, 100%. I've said
100%.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll say I don't think I've called an election wrong since I've been in politics, but it has less to do with Pierre, who I also will applaud. The efforts that he's making to broaden and modernize the party, the diversity of caucus now, etc. But it has more to do with the third termitis, and Canadians are just being sick of the Trudeau Liberals, just as they did with Stephen Harper and the Conservatives back, in 2015, just as people were sick of the Liberals, even when, Chrétien bowed out and Martin came in. It's just the nature of electoral cycles. we're a pretty patient country, Canadians in general, and so we generally give people a couple of kicks at the can, but by the time they're on the third go around, it doesn't matter what you do. People are just going to find fault with it. And the narrative of deterioration and out of touch for this government in particular is pretty solid, and it's it's evaporating even the base of the Liberal Party. They're either going to be sitting at home or they're going to the Conservatives. So look, it's still a while away from an election. Now, the big card that nobody can really guess is the NDP, right? They're the ones propping up Trudeau, and if at some point the Liberal caucus turn their knives on Trudeau, what will that mean for Jagmeet Singh? Will he actually pull the trigger and put us into an election on a money bill? I don't know. Those machinations are for the political class in Ottawa, but yeah, the general trend line is Pierre's popular. He's broadening the base and broadening the appeal of the party. He's talking about things that people care about, and he sounds like he makes sense. And people are sick of Trudeau. So
now, some people had, were concerned that he was too extreme right, that he was too appealing to the people that were part of the trucker convoy and the occupation, and that he was sort of Trump come to Canada. You don't think that he's too far right?
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Like, look at any of his rallies. I mean, there's people that go to these rallies. And even when I was in Ontario, I went to one, and there were people there that would not normally be engaged in politics out there, and they're supporting him. I don't think so. I think there's there's the convoy and in the lockdown. These were all very extraordinary circumstances for the country, for the world. People were reacting in all different kinds of ways that they normally wouldn't react in normal circumstances. But, I think what Pierre's talking about are those bread and butter issues, the checkbook issues that people care about, that they feel like this government's left them behind, that they feel like the Canadian dream is gone, that the next generation has no chance of home ownership, and that every time they turn around, the taxes are going up and services are going down. So, I think as long as Pierre sticks on those core messages, absolutely, he's going to be Canada's next prime minister. The only kind of concerns, that I flag is that we are, who knows when the next election is. So there's a long runway for a possibility of a misstep for Pierre. And Conservatives have a long tradition of shooting themselves in the foot. And in a way, and a much more effective way than the opposition can ever throw at them. So I am a bit concerned about that. But that being said, look, Pierre's been around this block for a long time. I mean, he's been in politics as long as I can remember. He's one of the first people I met in Ottawa back in 2002. And he loves this country. He works hard, has a great ethic, has a great family and wife and support team. And the front bench of the Conservatives is a much different party than it was 5 years ago. And thankfully for it, we needed the change. We needed to modernize. And, this week we saw Monty McNaughton resign from the Ford cabinet. And Monty, has a legacy of really bringing the Ontario PC party to union voters, public and private alike, and really broadening the base of that party that will, the Conservatives will enjoy for quite some time as a result of his efforts and his vision and his commitment and his enthusiasm to do that. Pierre's pretty similar. Like he's actually changed the actual composition of a Conservative. So, I'm obviously cheering from the sidelines, but I think a lot of Canadians want to see change. And it's a change election, and there's change in the air. And, I don't know if Trudeau's going to go have his long walk in the snow like his dad, but I'm sure a lot of his caucus colleagues would hope that he would.
Sara MacIntyre, thank you so much. That was really interesting. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Brian.
That's our show for tonight. Thanks everyone for joining. I remind you, I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online, even from Kelowna, at www.saga960am.ca. All my podcasts and videocasts are available on my website, briancrombie.com. I post my videos on social media, and my podcasts are available wherever good podcasts can be found. Thanks, everyone. Good night.